Madam Speaker, what the Honourable Member for Nickel South said, in fact, let me rephrase that. I jumped in there too quickly, Madam Speaker. What the member for Castries South said in his presentation, that I've always harbored anxieties about the CIP, and I had to be persuaded to agree to the CIP, is absolutely correct. That's no secret. I made that statement in this Honourable House. I'm sure that honourable members who attended that sitting when the legislation was introduced will remember that. And I made that statement at the inaugural launching of the CIP program in Monaco in Europe. Let me, Madam Speaker, explain what my anxieties have been and why today those anxieties have not been calmed, those anxieties have been heightened. The first thing is really purely theoretical, philosophical. It is that a CIP program is essentially an artificial construct. Artificial in the sense that we are creating a legal framework, creating legal infrastructure to bestow citizenship which does not arise out of the traditional circumstances that we understand. To wit, birth in a country, or parents who hold a certain kind of citizenship. Of course, the rebuttal to that is fairly simple, that you have been exporting people all these years in any event, whether it is to the UK, to St. Croix, to the US, and in time they apply for citizenship, although of course it is also well known that in time, once they have acquired citizenship, family members then use family lineage to justify immigration to the US and eventually green cards and citizenship. But it was an artificial construct for economic purposes. It was not a natural construct because it did not spring from the historical interpretation of law that confers citizenship. But that, I admit, is a theoretical, philosophical matter that has bothered me for a while. When we enacted the Citizenship by Investment Act, I was clear, and so was the cabinet that I led, that it had a very short life. We did not believe that it would endure beyond maybe 8 years for the most. And now, I think circumstances are conspiring that it may well not even endure another 5 to 6 years. Why? Because the circumstances in the world are changing so dramatically. And when you look at the number of countries now who have got themselves into trouble over the issue of granting citizenship to nationals, whether from Asia or from the Middle East, then you begin to grasp the enormity of the issue. And I don't see in the horizon that the tensions between Western Europe and the United States with Middle Eastern countries will ease. I don't see that happening. And whether we like it or not, that's our principal recruiting ground for these citizens. Of course, some turn to China and feel that China is a savior. It will provide the hundreds that we need. Now, there was a plus and a minus to this logic. Because on the plus side, it says, let's hurry up and see what benefits we can get as quickly as possible before it comes to a natural death. Or on the other side, ignore that, leave it alone, and all will be well. Of course, we are now seeing, even in Canada, there's been a revaluation of their own citizenship by investment program. And in Europe, there's a quiet re-evaluation that is on the way. We have to be exceptionally careful about Europe, if only because we have to bear in mind that a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the European countries that fall under the umbrella of Schengen decided to waive visas for St. Lucians and other nationals of the OECS. Question is whether we're going to protect that. How do we protect the right of those St. Lucians to continue to access those countries, and whether we engage in any behavior that can be potentially injurious. My third concern is, and it's been championed very well, is the danger of enclaves in this society. The member for Castries South explained that I was always worried about that issue. The member for Vieux-Fort North put it rather eloquently and in very colorful language. He spoke about the St. Lucian-ness of the program, the new citizen. And then, of course, to the credit of the member for Soisel, he hit the nail on the head, but he didn't nail it. He raised the issue of what will be the likely impact of the citizenship by investment program on our own nationals. Of course, he touched OECS nationals. But that is the kernel, and sometimes when I listen to him, I have to ask myself, I wonder whose side he's on. Because that is a fundamental question that we have to come to terms with. But I want to return to that in a few minutes. The fourth point, and I want to go back to this issue of the enclaves. You know, the logic of this program is that these rich people, these billionaires, millionaires, trillionaires, they will obtain citizenship in your country. They're not interested in residing in your country. They will do the investments. All they need, of course, is the passport. The question is how long that kind of arrangement will be maintained. I believe that sooner or later, one of these citizens will be approaching one of these courts in the region for a full declaration of what rights they're entitled to. Are they entitled to vote? Are they entitled to own land freely like everybody else? These are the kinds of questions that will arise. What rights do they have for any transgressions of the Bill of Rights? These are the kinds of questions. And very soon, that issue will have to be categorically litigated. I'll come to that in a few minutes. The second or the fourth thing that concerned me, and I was never able to resolve, was the issue of conflicts over the rights of such citizens. And the situation is not as clear as a member for Soisel is making it out to be. I have seen legislation from other OECS countries or from an OECS country that make it very clear that certain rights that are conferred on OECS nationals do not apply to CIP citizens, because basically the passports identify who these persons are. There is no constitutional rule that says that because you have CIP in St. Lucia, you grant a man citizenship in St. Lucia, then automatically if he goes to St. Vincent is bound to give him citizenship. There's no such rule. It may offend the movement of free persons across the region, the movement of citizens across the region, but that means it's a different set of rights that you're invoking, not a constitutional right. So this notion that somehow you must open your doors and accept everybody willy-nilly is not free of difficulty. And the fact that we have had no major conflict really has to do with the number of OECS countries that have moved in that direction. Dominica, Antigua, Grenada, St. Kitts, now St. Lucia, 5. And that is this idea of a protocol, an understanding between those countries, in fact, emerging out of the launching ceremony in Monaco, where it was first mooted, does make a certain amount of sense, because it may provide a degree of mutual protection. But it does not provide protection in respect of all other CARICOM countries, who are very deeply disturbed by these developments. So the issue is not free of difficulty. Finally, for me, there was a challenge of national security. We've had some strange things happening in the region in the last 18 months. You had a situation where a Chinese national who had acquired citizenship in St. Kitts, Nevis, the Chinese government wanted him for corruption in China. St. Kitts, Nevis does not have diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. But China exerted so much pressure at the end of the day that individual could not be protected under the umbrella of the citizenship that he had acquired in St. Kitts, Nevis, and eventually he was picked up and returned to China. Now, the attitude of China is not to be disregarded in this issue. And while it is the case that they appear to be turning a blind eye to this development, I am not so sure that the seeming friendliness or failure to acknowledge the existence of these programs will continue. And I make that point against the background that I expect continued tensions in the Asian theater with the North American theater, and even possibly some countries within Europe. I am one of those, Madam Speaker, who argued passionately for the 500 limit per year. And I've heard the arguments to suggest that there's no justification for the 500. But the fact of the matter, the 500 was closely identified with a marketing position and a marketing strategy, and also to the reputation of the country. It was our feeling at the time that if you were to test the vast majority of solutions, they probably, and I admit to you that is untested, and perhaps this is something now we need to test, they probably, Madam Speaker, will express deep uneasiness about the possibility that their country could be overrun by nationals of other countries holding valid passports. And so the thinking was, you keep the numbers at 500, you increase the unit prices substantially, and you position yourself in the marketplace to be different from the rest. Now, of course, you hear the argument that that was not competitive enough, that did not make sense, that you need to open all your doors. But as you open all the doors, you also open it up to public criticism and anxiety. And what has made the vital difference in all of this is Teotihuacan. Because from day one, he was opposed to the limit and argued with us trenchantly that we should not subscribe to any limit. Now, that, of course, is now settled in the minds of St. Lucians. But I believe that we have opened our borders in that way, as has happened with the amendments on the review, certainly, in my view, increases and intensifies the vulnerability that we all feel. The situation is not being helped by statements made by the minister who is responsible for the CIP program. And I'm going to circulate to honorable members, because I'm trying to follow your ruling, although I will say to you, I think that ruling needs to be reviewed, but I say so with respect. Statements made at an investment migration forum some time ago, and I'm going to circulate it before, Madam Speaker, I quote from it. Circulate. Go ahead. The statement was made on June 7th. And in my view, these are the kind of careless, unwarranted statements that are causing damage, that are causing anxiety, notwithstanding the applause that you get. The statement that I'm about to read out is dated June 7, 2007, and it says as follows. I'm going to read the entire thing to read it in the record. I know that the honorable member for Mico South, when he replies, would be absolutely entitled to reply to what he's quoted as saying, or even possibly denied, who knows. Quote, "It was during Wednesday's session of the Investment Migration Forum in front of 300 or so delegates assembled in the Geneva Kempinski Grand Ballroom that St. Lucian Prime Minister Alan Chasney announced his country's CIP will begin paying a 10% commission to all registered agents promoting the 100,000 contribution option. The audience, a veritable who's who of the investment migration industry, CEOs of the world's largest immigration firms, CIU officials, the field's most prominent academics as well as heads of state met the news with cheers. The PM also went on to dispel any confusion about the rights pertaining to citizenship obtained by investment, saying individuals naturalized through the country's CIP have the same rights as St. Lucia-born citizens. And they quote him, "If you get a citizenship through the CIP and later get married, your spouse can apply for citizenship. If you get a citizenship through the CIP and later have children, your descendants can apply for citizenship as well." That is legal heresy. But I'll continue. Commenting on the recent tribulation of Caribbean banks, sizable payments to which are frequently withheld or even halted by U.S. intermediary banks due ostensibly inadequate documentation, the PM revealed plans to accept CIP payments in denominations other than the US dollar as a means of circumventing the correspondence banking system that is currently delaying the transfer of CIP funds from investors in the country. Now, I want that to sink in, really sink in, and ask the question whether any Prime Minister should be saying in public that his objective is to circumvent. Last paragraph. Chesney further disclosed plans for opening a St. Lucian residence by investment program. The scheme would enable successful applicants to settle permanently in St. Lucia and, by extension, any CARICOM state. Again, another piece of heresy. And to apply for the citizenship after 5 years. Residents obtaining a permanent residence through this program would be taxed at a very low non-domicile tax rate. The PM promised further details on this program in the weeks to come. I want to return to the substance of the document. I take first. If you get a citizenship through the CIP and later get married, your spouse can apply for citizenship. If you get a citizenship through the CIP and later have children, your descendants can apply for citizenship as well. I have gone through that Citizenship by Investment Act, and I can find nowhere where that can happen. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, if you look at the Citizenship by Investment Act, you will notice that the category that would attract would be clause 3 subclause 2, section 3 subsection 2, and section 5 of the Citizenship by Investment Act. That section says a person born outside St. Lucia after the appointed date shall become a citizen at that date of his or her birth if at the later date his or her father or mother is a citizen otherwise than by virtue of this section or section 3.2. This provision has attracted the attention of the Office of the Attorney General. And while it is true a new man now occupies that office, but I am able to say that I am aware of a legal opinion from the chambers of the Attorney General, certainly during my time, making it quite clear that children born to parents who obtained citizenship status pursuant to sections 3.1 and section 5 that I have just read out are prohibited from being considered as St. Lucian citizens. Now, why would you want to go there? Even if, for argument's sake, your interpretation of that section was right, why would you want to go and announce to an international community that once you get a citizenship by CIP, then if you get married 2 months later, everything all right, your spouse can just normally apply for citizenship, so too can the children all normally apply, using a different door to what created the CIP. Why would you do that? For hurrahs? For claps? That's why you're going to do that? And what are the implications of making that kind of statement to the people of St. Lucia? Telling them that in effect, You are prepared to interpret the laws of the country to say that once you give citizenship by a passport, then a few months later the doors become open and you can grant citizenship in accordance with the Act. But that last paragraph is even more ominous. As I said, it's legal heresy. The fact that you grant permanent citizenship to someone in St. Lucia, it does not mean that the same rights to which they are entitled in St. Lucia, that they are entitled in other CARICOM states. Permanent residence is a singular act to the country where it was granted. You cannot hold out that kind of promise to would-be investors to sell your product when it is bound to create unnecessary anxiety among members of the regional community. I don't know of any situation where once you grant permanent residence to an individual, that automatically the rights that you confer on that individual, it obtains elsewhere. You might argue the case in respect of citizens, as I said. You might argue that case. You might argue it. Although, as I pointed out, there are countries who are beginning to make those distinctions between ordinary St. Lucian citizens and, of course, persons who have obtained citizenship under CIP programs. Having said that, Madam Speaker, I had a concern at the arguments about due diligence. I will not respond to the picong about if you can class it as such about Rochamel and this and that. Leave that. But I'm not so sure that those due diligence initiatives or procedures are as ironclad as we want them to be. The question that the Prime Minister has to answer, the member for Miku South has to answer in his presentation, is whether there are persons who were rejected by the board some weeks or months ago, but those decisions were reversed. They were rejected because of failure of due diligence. And all of a sudden, those decisions were reversed and granted passports. If that is the case, who are those individuals? I will simply say this. Remember, this Swazelle is right. That due diligence is perhaps one of the very key elements. And sorting out due diligence must mean that we have exceedingly close relationships with the United States, with Canada, and with the European countries. They must have a clear idea how we are embarking on those due diligence procedures. Who are the individuals doing the due diligence? What are the reports on these individuals that have been considered? And well, I know the member from Miku South touts his relationship with the United States, champions that relationship. But I think all of us around this table need to be reminded what happened to the former Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Denzil Douglas, when he was called up to the State Department and he was told by the State Department that they needed a complete list of all the applicants for the CIP program and who was granted citizenship. That is why, Madam Speaker, that due diligence is not a matter that should be in the bosom of the government solely, but it is a matter, it has to be open, it has to be transparent. Madam Speaker, where do I stand with the CIP program? I gave you an indication of why initially I was persuaded to go along with it. Nothing has happened to inspire me, to give me confidence. I can't agree with the measures that have been taken by the government because it is denaturing what I believe, what I stood for. It is true that while we crafted the initiative together with input from civil society and the opposition, it is true we did that. It is also true that because of the anxiety to bring the legislation in force, we did have to come to Parliament urgently and quickly. And then it is interesting too that I remember well the member for Castries Southeast when he saw the section that is now being contested today on the negative resolution, that he asked for an explanation of what a negative resolution was all about. And I had to explain at the time that the negative resolution essentially allowed the regulation to come into force unless annulled by the House. Now, of course, the law that governs these negative resolutions is contained in the Interpretation Act, and the Interpretation Act provides a window of 40 days for an annulment to take place. It's actually, for those who are interested, I think it is in Section 39 of the Interpretation Act, subsection 7 and 8. I still believe that the negative resolution procedure is the way to go. I still believe that. But I also believe that precisely because of the sensitivities that is involved in this program and the dangers that are lurking, the events so eloquently described by the member for Castries South and the member for Castries East, that program can best survive by cooperation between the respective parties. And I believe that the initiative with which it was started should be sustained. It is very interesting as you listen to the member for Canaries and Anster, and you know I really don't have much time for his views, but it is interesting that he can say things like, we had no choice, we had to do it, circumstances. Same conclusion from the member for Suzel. I believe, like the member for Castries East, the leader of the opposition, that the time has come to carve out some kind of understanding or arrangement regarding that program to safeguard it. We don't have time. That's my point. Madam Speaker, the truth is, as I said, I haven't been persuaded otherwise about my views. I am inching towards rejection of this program, and I have made my position very clear that I have always had anxieties. But I hope that does not happen. I don't want it to happen. And so I urge that we take a different approach to this program by ensuring perhaps that there's a joint parliamentary committee that can oversee whatever actions and decisions that are taking place under this program. Madam Speaker, I thank you.